you guys, it is officially June. And depending on who you are as a person, that either means it's time to get gay or it's time for America. Can you guess which one I am? Proud to be an American. All jokes aside, I did have a whole other episode planned for today because it is Pride Month. And so I think it's worth it to discuss it in all of its excellency, all of its glory, dissect it, look at it. But then Time magazine released an interview with Joe Biden, and that took precedence. So we will be getting gay with it next week. This week, we will be getting senile with it. But before we get into any of that, please make sure that you are subscribed to this channel. Give this video a thumbs up. I put in a lot of work to get these videos out for you guys each week, editing, research, recording, the whole shebang. So it would really, really mean a lot if you are on Spotify. Give the show a review, a follow, and as always, all of my other social medias are in the description down below if you want to go and check those out. And with that, my name is Noelle. This is Just Say No. Let's get into it. So as we have heard from the media, from whoever it may be, Joe Biden is with it. In fact, he is the most with it president of our lifetimes. As Karine Jean-Pierre has so often put it, he is so sharp that the aides have a hard time keeping up with him. So that should be reflected in this interview, shouldn't it? Shouldn't it? That should be reflected in an interview in which there is no video recording of. Should that not? Should it not be reflected? It's just writing. So it's hard to fudge that up, I would suspect. But you would be wrong. If that was the bet you had made, you would be wrong. You would be misled and out some money. It is my belief at this point, somebody is out to get Joe Biden. I don't know if it's his publicist. I don't know if it's the Time magazine interviewer or God himself. Because as we said, this is a transcribed interview. There is no video recording of this. So you could just leave out the mumble jumble. You don't even have to put it in. But they did. They left all of it in and all of its glory. So we are going to have a good laugh. We're going to have a good laugh, except for the fact that it's not funny. It's not funny at all because he is our president. At least on its face, he is our president. So laugh, cry, however you want to feel. Let's dive in. So a lot of this interview, especially the first portion of it, is focused on Biden's foreign policy and what's going on overseas, which I think is incredibly important because I believe that it is Biden's weakest point, and I think it's Trump's strongest point. So comparing these two is always a good time. It's always very interesting. So I want to read you a couple of quotes. We're going to go through a lot of quotes from here because it's amazing. It truly is something. So the first question was, can America still play the role of a world power as it did in World War II and the Cold War? Dear Sleepy Joe, he says, we are the world power. And what I inherited as a consequence of the mistake that we made in Afghanistan was not a loss in Afghanistan. Excuse my cold. That's the first sentence, ladies and gentlemen. That is the first. So we are not, in fact, the world power. We are the world laughingstock. We are the world joke, the clown. Power? No, sir. No, sir. And I think this is quite apparent. I think it's quite apparent that nobody takes Joe Biden seriously when you look at everything that's going on abroad, between Putin going into Ukraine, with Hamas fearlessly attacking Israel. I mean, that's always going on, but quite boldly, I would say, as of recent months, China moving in on Taiwan. Nobody is taking Joe Biden seriously. Nobody is taking his threats seriously. And that's a problem. That's dangerous. I don't think people realize how dangerous that is when one of the world's leading powers has such a weak leader. It's reflected overseas. It truly is. It truly, truly is. But he continues on. And so I've always believed that there are two elements to American security. And the biggest element and our normative example is our alliances, We have, compared to the rest of the world, we have put together the strongest alliance in the history of the world. Number one. Number two, we're in a situation where we are able to move in a way that recognizes how much of the world has changed and still lead the world. And it's our security. For example, the idea that if Putin decided to go into Russia, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought Putin was already in Russia. I thought that was like the whole thing, that he was moving outside of Russia. I thought that was the whole thing. He goes on. I mean, he's going to go from Russia into Ukraine. Ooh, can I get a Google Translate from doddering fool into English, please? Nothing he said was coherent. There was a lot there. There were a lot of big words. There was some words. There were medium words. There were small words. There's a lot of variety. None of them made sense together. It wasn't coherent. He goes on. This, by the way, if you haven't read it, you should. He pulls out a copy of Putin's speech. It's the address to the Russian people on the Donbass problem on February 21st when Moscow was going in. And it lays out why I believe Trump, what he never understood, which is that Russia, he wasn't going into Moscow. I mean, from Russia into Ukraine for purposes of keeping them from having weapons. At this point, I don't even think Putin knows where he's going. I don't think Putin knows where he started or where he's going or where he's trying to end up. If I were Putin and I read this, I would be confused. Am I in America now? I don't know. He might be. So the last question on this topic was if NATO is on a slippery slope to war with Ukraine. And Biden's answer was, no, we're on a slippery slope for war if we don't do something about Ukraine. It's not just gonna... Anyway, honestly, I don't even need a video of this interview. I can hear him. I can just hear him. Well, anyway.
If it holds near and dear to you that you like to be able to... Anyway.
So the interview switches it up and starts questioning him about Israel. And he postures as if he's trying to be secretive about it for military reasons, is what I feel. I think the reality is that he knows that if he comes out and straight up supports Israel, the majority of his base is going to come for blood because they support terrorists, you know? So a lot of the questions that he gets asked, he dodges. He's like, I can't answer that, whatever. But one in particular is answered. And his answer to it was, I'm not going to respond to that because I'm about to make Anyway. It's a wonder that the people in charge of his campaign allowed this to be published. It's bad. It's really bad, you guys. So he does get pushed on Hamas, and I will say he does do a decent job of not downplaying the tragedies that occurred. He went into great detail about what occurred on October 7th, and he doesn't at all downplay that. And he also discusses the fact that large parts of the suffering that are happening in Gaza are because of Hamas, which is true, which is absolutely true. That said, I don't think that the words that he's saying here are translating into policy at all. So the interview presses Biden, and he asks if it's Hamas's fault or Israel's fault that there has not been a ceasefire yet. And the transcript says Hamas. Hamas could end this tomorrow. Hamas could say unintelligible. We could have clarified. I mean, this is not a recording. He could have clarified. Now, I do know that sometimes when you're doing these kinds of transcript interviews, sometimes the mic doesn't pick it up. Sometimes you're listening back to it to transcribe it, and you just cannot hear what that person said. My cat just tried to slam the door, sorry. But you cannot hear what the person said, and that does happen sometimes. But you and I know, we both know, let's not lie to ourselves, that is not what happened here. This was him going, and then a Putin avenue under pressure.
I'll lead an effective strategy to mobilize true international effort to pressure.
That's what happened, and that's largely different from like if he just kind of got away from his microphone and was speaking over here, you could probably not hear me very well. That's not what happened. He said So he was asked about tactics that are being used by Israel, and his response was, don't try. The idea of occupying Afghanistan, the idea that you had nuclear arsenals in Iran that were in Iraq that were being generated, simply not true. Are we in Iraq, Iran, Russia, Earth? Where are we, Joe? Joe, Where are we? So then they go on to talk about North Korea, because as I said, a lot of this interview is about what's going on overseas with foreign wars, because things have kind of gone to shit since he's taken office. Let's be honest with ourselves. So then they're continuing on with foreign policy, and he says, they asked me, I've spent more time with Xi Jinping than any leader in the world, over 90 hours alone with him since I've been vice president, and we have a very candid relationship. I'm so sorry. Quick question, quick interjection here. Joe, are you also bought and paid for by China, or is having a working relationship with the leader of China only something that is bad when Trump does it? I'm just curious. I'm just really curious, because that's fascinating. He goes on. I don't have any unintelligible. He wanted to know why I was doing all these things. I said the simple reason I am doing those things, to make sure that you aren't able to change the status quo any. Twice now, the interviewer has been unable to discern what Joe Biden said and had to input unintelligible. Twice now. And I'm going to say it one more time. You know that it's not a microphone malfunction if you're being honest with yourself. You know that that's not what happened there. It is, in fact, the reality that Joe Biden is old and incapable of stringing a sentence together full of individual words without them bleeding together into one big word. So then they start talking about issues closer to home, things like inflation, and the interviewer says, cumulative inflation means that prices are up 18%, at least since you took office, and wage increases have not kept pace. What is Joe Biden's answer? He says, since who took office? Since I took office? Joe, you are president, honey. Do they have to, is it like 50 First Dates where they have to just play him a tape every morning and like remind him where he is and who he is? Do you think that's the situation behind the scenes? I wouldn't be too surprised. Since I took office, Joe, please. So the interviewer tries to right this sinking ship and said, yeah, we're talking about you, Joe. Cumulative inflation means prices are up nearly 20% since you, Joe Biden, took office, and wage increases have not kept pace. Joe says, wage increases have exceeded what the cost of inflation, which you're talking about as the prices that were pre-COVID prices. Pre-COVID prices are not the same as whether or not you have corporate America ripping off the public now. You have everything from shrinkflation to what's going on in terms of the way in which they are artificially moving significantly to increase their profits. They didn't have to do that. I mean, let's just be honest. They didn't have to put the stutter in. And this is what I mean when I said someone's out to get Joe Biden. They did not have to leave a stutter in. They really didn't. I understand that it's one thing with the unintelligible stuff because there was something said there and you can't make it out. You didn't have to leave in the stutter. The interviewer tries to push through. But Mr. President, won't your newly announced tariffs raise the price on American consumers? Joe Biden says, no, because here's the deal.
Now, here's the deal. The deal is that it's going to wipe out pre-existing conditions. And by the way, the 200,000 people that have died on his watch, how many of those have survived?
There's a difference. I made it clear to Putin from the very beginning that we're not engaging in. For example, Trump wants a 10% tariff on everything. That will raise the price of everything in America. And then there's an editor's note attached to this one that says, Biden appeared to mean Xi here, not Putin. It disturbs me, but it's not surprising. It's not surprising because he does this all the time. All of the time, he says the wrong name, the wrong place, the wrong location, and one of these days it's going to start a damn war. And then immediately following this was some more unintelligible speak from our president. And to conclude the interview, the interviewer decides to do some rapid fire questions, which is amazing because Joe couldn't keep up with regular fire questions. But let's take a look. The interviewer asks, another of your first acts as president under the banner of value-based leadership was to lift various punitive Trump-era immigration measures, Mr. President, that you and others said were inhumane. In retrospect, do you think those humanitarian moves helped drive record illegal border crossings? And Biden just lies out of his wrinkled old mouth and just, no, he doesn't. Maybe that's the problem. Do you believe him? I don't know if it's stupidity or malice. I truly don't. He was asked, were you wrong to lift any of those measures? And Biden boldly claims, if I was wrong, it was only because I took too long. Wow. Whoa. Wow. That's... Interviewer continues, you've put some back in place, the green card issue. It's been reported that you're looking at reinstating stay in Mexico. Are you looking at reinstating gets cut off? No. Joe Biden was behind the curve this whole interview. The one time he cuts the interviewer off, the one time he has one strong message, it's that he will not be reinstating stay in Mexico. That's not good, ladies and gentlemen. That's not good. And to be completely honest, this might be one of the most important things said in this interview, because he constantly tries to push that he's being hard on the border and that the only reason nothing happened is because Republicans said no to the border bill a couple months ago. Never mentions the billions and billions of dollars that were going overseas. That had nothing to do with why Republicans said no to the border bill. It's just because all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Republicans decided they don't give a shit about the border. I'm sure. If you believe that narrative, God help you. So the interviewer continues on to discuss Biden's age. He says, you are 81 years old and would be 86 by the time you left office. Large majorities of Americans, including the Democratic Party, tell pollsters that they think you are too old to lead. Could you really do this job as an 85-year-old man? And he answers, I can do it better than anybody you know. You're looking at me. I can take you too. What does that even mean? I can take you too. In a fight? In a debate? I don't think he could do either. In a brisk walk down the street? Don't think he could do that either. Walking up some stairs? I don't think he could do that either. I don't think that there's anything that he could take on anyone with. He's not all there. Nobody's home. The lights are off, guys. They're off. The interviewer asks him, do you consider not running again because of your age? He says, no. No, I don't consider that. What do you say to Americans who are worried about it? Watch me. Joe, that's the problem. We are watching you. We're watching you very, very closely. We're watching you fall up the stairs. We're watching you linger above seats. We're watching you get dragged away from events by your wife, who, by the way, is a horrible person for letting her husband go through all of this. We are watching you, Joe, and that is the problem. So that concludes the interview. But before we conclude the episode, first of all, I would be remiss if I did not show you Harry Sissin's reaction to this. Now, if you don't know who this is, he is a 21-year-old child who is literally deep-throating the White House right now. It's quite embarrassing. So he tweeted out a picture of this magazine cover and said, wow, I am blown away by this photo of President Biden for Time magazine. He's standing firmly behind the Resolute desk, ready to put it all on the line to fight for Americans. This is a man dedicated to the country. 4 more years. Harry, you sweet, mentally ill little shit. He is going to grow up and be so embarrassed by how far down his throat big government is. You just have to feel sympathy for him. This poor kid, he's only 21 years old. He doesn't know shit. He thinks he does because the government is paying him. I really do hope that the government's paying him, because if he's putting in all this work for free, that's even worse. But for the last segment of this episode, I wanted to compare Biden's Time interview magazine to Trump's, because he also did a Time interview magazine earlier this year. And the difference is absolutely astounding, you guys. It is astounding. So here's his cover. And does he look old? Yeah, Yeah. Are these just two old men going at it? They sure are. But Trump actually looks resolute. He doesn't look like he's going to break like a toothpick. And that is on Diet Coke, ladies and gentlemen, America. Since we do have this interview for Trump and they're the same magazine, the same format, it's the whole like if he wins ordeal, it's a perfect thing to compare. And the first thing that I want to note is the estimated read lengths, because Trump's is about 3 times as long. Biden's estimated read length is 28 minutes and Trump's, I believe, was 83. So do you mean to tell me that you have more to discuss with the former president than you do with the current one? Or is it that Joe Biden is old and cannot do long form conversations like this? Take your guess. Take your guess. Now, what I will say, it is not an even interview at all. They push Trump much harder than they push Biden, which is to be expected. So maybe that is what's eating up some of this time here. But also it's the fact that Trump is a yapper. He's a yapper. But that means his brain's working. He can yap and it's coherent and you know what he's saying. So, and also there might be some people who say, well, yeah, of course the president only has 30 minutes to do an interview. He's the president. He's busy. You don't think Trump's busy? He is running a campaign for president and also being indicted and persecuted in like 87 courts across the country. He's kind of busy. So I just don't want to hear it. Simply, I just don't. So immediately coming into this interview, the interviewer starts asking him about actions on the border, and Trump cuts him off. And yes, interviewer says, you have vowed to. Trump cuts him off and said, and on energy. Interviewer starts asking another question. Trump cuts him off, gives a very coherent answer. And the point here that I'm trying to make, because I don't want to go too deep in depth with Trump's interview, because again, it is very, very long. It will be linked down below if you want to check that out for yourself. But the point here is that the interviewer doesn't even have time to get his questions all the way out before Trump's giving him his answers. He's actually quick on his feet, which is what they keep trying to push us and make us believe that Biden is. But if you were to watch, and I did this yesterday, I watched, because Trump had a interview with Dr. Phil, and that was too glorious to not watch. And then I got curious and I watched an interview with Joe Biden, and it's just incomparable, you guys. It's not comparable. And when I was saying earlier how it's not an even interview, how they push Trump much harder, this is an example of that. When they question him on detention camps, and he keeps giving the answer of, no, I don't think we'll need to build more detention camps because we're going to just take them outside of the country. Like, they're not going to be in the country. We don't need detention camps. But they don't let up because they want that gotcha moment. They want to run the headline, Trump's going to build more detention camps to keep children in and break up families, blah, blah, blah. Even though that was Obama era policy, fun fact, they want that gotcha moment. They do the exact same thing with, they ask him, because some conservative media outlet said that if he gets in, that they need to challenge the 22nd Amendment and let him have 2 consecutive terms close together. And Trump says, I hadn't heard anyone say that. I don't support that. I'm going to serve my 4 years and retire. And he's very adamant about this. And the interviewer keeps pushing him, saying, yeah, but you're going to try and challenge the 22nd Amendment because they want that gotcha moment. They want that headline of Trump's going to be a dictator. They do this several times throughout the interview. I can't remember all of them, but at several points, he's giving a very clear, precise. Oh, another one was if he would challenge the Supreme Court. I don't remember if it was immigration, maybe it was abortion. And Trump very clearly, concisely says, I will only do what I'm allowed to do within the confines of the law. If the Supreme Court makes a ruling, I will honor and respect that ruling. And again, the interviewer pushes him, yeah, but you'd challenge it. You would challenge it, wouldn't you? And Trump's, no, I would not. I would work within the confines of the law because they want that headline. They want that gotcha moment, and he didn't give it to them. And I think that he's been doing himself massive favors lately by not focusing on 2020. He's been focusing on immigration, on inflation, on foreign affairs. He's been focusing on issues that are impacting America actually. And that is where he wins. That's how he wins, is making it a referendum on Joe Biden and not on himself. And that's where his focus needs to remain. But I just want to talk about one last thing from this interview, and it was Trump's rapid fire section. The interviewer says, okay, let's do some rapid fire questions. And Trump says, all right, do you think you could do this interview with Biden? Interviewer says, he didn't say yes. So I'm grateful that you're giving me this opportunity. Trump says he will never say yes because he's off. He's off, way off. I can hear him too. But I think it's funny because Trump released this interview. I'm not quite sure when this came out, maybe February. I know it was earlier this year. And now all of a sudden Biden does the interview. And that's interesting because he had apparently said no to this interview. And then Trump did it, and now he agrees to do it. So that's just a little suspect, but whatever. All right, you guys, that is all that I have for you guys today. I really appreciate you guys hanging out, especially if you made it all the way to the end of the episode. You are the best. And like I said, next week we're going to dive into some Pride stuff. So be ready for that. Get your little rainbow flag or whatever it is you need. Dye your hair blue, get a septum piercing, get in the mood. All right. I'll talk to you guys next Monday. Bye.